The Bible once spoke of a race of giants, then silently erased them from history. Have you ever wondered why some verses in the Bible seem like fragments of a larger, hidden tale, one that was never meant to be told in full? Among the most chilling of these fragments is a brief, almost whispered mention of the Nephilim, a name that echoes with ancient fear, a mystery that has disturbed theologians and historians alike. Who were they really? Were they merely mythical symbols? Or were they real beings, children of a forbidden union between the divine and the human, whose very existence threatened the order of heaven and earth? And if so, why did the church remove them from its teachings? Cinematic flashes. A towering shadow falls across a battlefield. A stone engraving of monstrous warriors. Hebrew script flickers on screen. Empyelium. The sound of thunder. A tear-stained parchment. A whisper. They walked the earth. There were giants in the earth in those days. The book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4, buried between the tale of creation and the account of the flood, states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." At first glance, this verse might seem poetic, even benign, but to the ancient Hebrew audience, it was neither. It was a chilling admission. There once walked a generation not born of Adam alone, but of a union between the sons of God, Binui Halhim, and the daughters of man. But who were these sons of God? And what kind of beings did they create? The first rebellion. In ancient Jewish tradition, especially in the texts excluded from the modern Bible, the answer is stark. The sons of God were watchers, a class of powerful angels tasked with observing humanity. But they did not merely observe. They descended, as described in the Book of Enoch, to take human women for themselves. From these forbidden unions came forth Nephilim, a word that some translate as fallen ones and others as giants. They were not like men. They were towering, ravenous, and violent. So violent, according to tradition, that their presence helped bring about the flood. And yet, this apocalyptic event wasn't just about man's wickedness. It was a cosmic judgment on a hybrid race that should never have existed, buried in plain sight. Why then are the Nephilim barely mentioned in sermons today? Why do pastors skip Genesis 6:4 with hurried explanations, calling it metaphorical or symbolic? The answer lies in what happened after Genesis was written. Over centuries, church councils debated which books belonged in the biblical canon. The Book of Enoch, once widely read by Jews and early Christians, was cast out. Its tales of angelic rebellion and divine punishment were too strange, too heretical, too dangerous. And with it, the Nephilim began to vanish from public theology, not because they weren't written of, but because they threatened the very boundary between heaven and earth. Clues from the ancient world. Despite their erasure from modern Christian teaching, the memory of these giants endured, across cultures and continents. In Sumerian tablets, we read of beings called the Anunnaki, gods who descended from the heavens and mated with mortals. In Greek mythology, there are the Titans, offspring of divine and human blood. In Canaanite lore, the Rephaim and Anakim, described as giants, haunted valleys and opposed Israel. In the apocryphal text Jubilees, the sins of these hybrid beings are directly linked to the flood and the corruption of the earth. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century, contain references to the giant offspring of the Watchers, detailing their destruction and the horror they inflicted. The pattern is unmistakable, a shared memory echoing across the sands of time, that once beings not quite divine and not quite human stalked the earth. Suppressed for a reason, but if the Nephilim were real, why hide them? Perhaps the better question is, what would it mean if they were real? It would mean that heaven was not a sealed realm, that angels could fall, that humans could bear children with them, that Genesis was never a simple moral tale, but the opening salvo of a war between heaven and earth, bloodlines and powers, truth and silence. It would mean that the world you thought you knew, the clean, orderly one described in sanitized Sunday sermons, was built over a buried battlefield, a battlefield littered with the bones of giants. The first cover-up in history? In the 2nd century AD, church fathers like Tertullian and Justin Martyr still accepted Enoch's account of the Nephilim as literal truth. But by the 4th century, under the authority of councils and emperors, the supernatural worldview of the early church was steadily replaced with a more rational theology. The Nephilim, the Watchers, and the Great Cosmic Rebellion, cast into the shadows, declared heresy, branded as myths. But the text remains, in your Bible, hidden in plain sight. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And also afterward? Afterward, yes, they returned. And that is what we'll uncover in the next part. What if the Bible was never meant to be safe? What if its most terrifying truths were simply buried, waiting for those who dare to see? If Nephilim once walked the earth, could they walk it still? Could they return again? Could they already be here? Continue the journey, because this is only the beginning. They were not just giants, they were the result of an unholy union, an act so blasphemous it shattered the harmony of heaven and stained the earth with blood. In the ancient text known as the Book of Enoch, long hidden from public eyes and officially cast aside by religious authorities, we find an explosive account, one that dares to tell the true origin of the Nephilim and the celestial betrayal that unleashed them. This book was once revered by the early church, even quoted by Jude in the New Testament. Yet today it is treated as dangerous mythology. Why? Because it tells a version of events that changes everything. In those days, when the children of men had multiplied, it happened that there were born unto them daughters that were fair and beautiful. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them. These are the opening words of the Book of Enoch, chapter 6. It reads almost like Genesis 6:4, but here the mystery is no longer veiled in metaphor. It is declared openly, shockingly. A group of angels called the Watchers looked down upon the earth, and instead of remaining loyal to the Most High, they descended onto Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. 200 of them, each one mighty, radiant, and divine. And they made a pact, not a prayer, not a mission, a blood pact, that they would all take wives from the daughters of men, that they would all share in the same sin, so that none could betray the others when judgment came. They were called the Watchers, and they became the fallen. Among their leaders was Semjasa, the instigator. He feared going alone in rebellion, so he made sure all were bound together. And another name appears, Azazel, a being so wicked that later Jewish tradition associated him with the wilderness scapegoat of Leviticus, cast out, rejected, cursed. It was Azazel, the book says, who taught mankind the secrets of war, swords, knives, shields, armor. He corrupted the earth, not just with blood, but with forbidden knowledge. The giants are born to the human women the Watchers gave strange children, children who grew into monsters. They became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 cubits. That's over 300 meters. Even if that number is symbolic, the meaning is clear. They were incomprehensibly massive. These Nephilim were not noble saviors. They were devourers of animals, of crops, of men. And when the earth could no longer sustain their hunger, they turned to cannibalism, then to blood drinking, then to warfare without end. The Book of Enoch describes them as a plague upon creation itself, and the earth cried out. Yes, in this book, even the earth has a voice. It groans beneath their weight. It bleeds beneath their violence, and it begs the heavens to intervene. God's judgment is unleashed. And heaven hears. The archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, are sent not just to bring judgment upon humanity, but to destroy the giants, to bind the Watchers in chains, to purge creation of the consequences of their rebellion. Raphael is tasked with binding Azazel in the desert, casting him into darkness until the final judgment. Gabriel is sent to destroy the children of the Watchers, the Nephilim, by stirring them against one another in a genocidal frenzy. It is not a peaceful cleansing, it is war. The great flood, in this account, is not just a punishment for human corruption, but a strategic reset, a cosmic sterilization, a flood to wash away the giants, and yet some survived. Here lies the most troubling verse in all of Genesis, easily overlooked, almost never preached. Genesis 6:4 says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward." Also afterward. How? If the flood destroyed them all, who were the giants mentioned in the time of Moses? Who were the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim? Who was Goliath, and why did he have brothers? The Book of Enoch gives us an answer many don't dare consider. The spirits of the slain Nephilim, denied heaven and denied hell, became what we now call demons, wandering the earth, bodiless, seeking to corrupt, to possess, to destroy. Yes, according to Enoch, demons are not fallen angels. They are the ghosts of giants, born of heaven and earth, too corrupt for both. Why was Enoch removed? The Book of Enoch was known and respected in the Second Temple period. It shaped much of the theology of early Jewish mysticism. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still includes it in its canon. Early church fathers like Tertullian considered it scripture. And the Apostle Jude quotes it directly in Jude 1:14-15. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, "Behold, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge all." But by the 4th century, Enoch was gone from the Western canon. Why? Because its stories were too apocalyptic. Because it taught that not all evil came from man, but from celestial rebellion. Because it suggested that the world was far more supernatural than Rome or Constantinople wanted to admit. Because it opened the door to a terrifying question. If angels once fell, could they fall again? The war was cosmic. This wasn't just about sin. It was about bloodlines. The Nephilim weren't merely sinners. They were a biological threat to God's design, an invasive species, a counterfeit creation. And so the flood wasn't just judgment. It was surgical. It was cosmic warfare aimed at eradicating a species that should never have existed. But they were not entirely wiped out. Their descendants, or echoes, would appear again, and again, and again, from Canaan to Philistia, from Og of Bashan to Goliath of Gath. The war never truly ended. And if the giants were not just symbols, but real, physical beings, if their spirits became demons, if their story was erased, not because it was false, but because it was too true, then the question becomes painfully urgent. Are they coming back? And could it be that they already have? In the next part, we will trace the footprints of the Nephilim after the flood, their resurgence in Israelite history, and the terrifying implication that Genesis 6:4 was not a legend, but a prophecy. There were Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterward. This quiet clause tucked into Genesis 6:4 may be the most disturbing line in the entire Bible. For centuries, scholars and clergy tried to explain it away. Some said it referred to another kind of giants. Others suggested the phrase was metaphorical. But the ancient texts and the biblical record paint a different picture. The Nephilim were not entirely destroyed in the flood. They survived, or they returned. And their presence haunts the pages of Scripture long after the waters recede. The sons of Anak, giants in Canaan. Centuries after the flood, when Moses sends 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan, they return terrified. In Numbers 13, 32, 33, they say, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them." Did you catch that? The Nephilim are back, not in the form of metaphor, not in the fog of legend, but in the memory of 12 eyewitnesses, trained men, chosen leaders. They did not say giants like the Nephilim. They said the Nephilim themselves. Even more, they name a tribe descended from them, the Anakim. Anak, their forefather, was a name whispered in dread. His children lived in Hebron in the hill country, fortified cities, home to beings of unnatural size and strength, and the Israelites feared them. The Rephaim, spirits of the dead giants. But Anakim were not alone. Other tribes of giants are listed throughout the Old Testament: the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, each with terrifying stature, each eventually driven out or destroyed, but never fully explained. Deuteronomy 3:11 speaks of King Og of Bashan, last of the Rephaim. His bed was made of iron, its length over 13 feet. Og was a king, but more than that, he was a remnant, a surviving bloodline from a prehistoric age. And then there are the Psalms and the prophets, where Rephaim no longer simply refers to giants, but to the dead, spirits in the shadowy realm of Sheol. The term blurs. The dead giants become restless, whispering from the underworld. Were these ancient tribes merely large humans, or were they the last seed of the Nephilim? And if so, how did they survive the flood? How could they have lived? There are three possibilities, none of them comforting. One, a second descent. The Book of Enoch speaks of 200 watchers descending before the flood, but it does not say there weren't others. Could there have been a second group, new rebels, after the flood? The text never rules it out. Two, genetic carriers. What if the wives of Noah's sons carried the bloodline of the Nephilim? If even one woman had been tainted by the watchers, the seed could have passed down silently, hidden, waiting, until it rose again in the sons of Enoch. Three, survivors. Some apocryphal traditions suggest that a few giants survived the flood by supernatural means, clinging to the ark, hiding in high mountains, protected by demonic forces. These tales were dismissed as legend, but in the biblical context, legend and reality are not so easily separated. Whichever path it was, the results are clear. They came back, and Israel would face them again. David and the final giants. Everyone knows the story of David and Goliath, but few know the full story. Goliath was not alone. 2 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles 20 describe other battles where David's mighty men faced off against more giants. One had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, a physical mutation common in descriptions of the Nephilim and their kin. Another was said to have a spearhead that weighed 300 shekels of bronze. They were called descendants of Rapha, a word linked directly to Rephaim. David was not merely fighting foreign soldiers. He was finishing an ancient war, a war that began before the flood, a war that threatened the purity of the bloodline from which the Messiah would come. And that, perhaps, was the real reason these giants had to die. Bloodlines and prophecies. God promised that the Messiah would come from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and eventually David. But what if that seed had been corrupted? What if Satan's strategy, before the flood and after, was to pollute the human bloodlines so thoroughly that the promised Savior could never be born? In this light, the Nephilim are not just freaks of nature. They are a weapon, a genetic virus, a spiritual cancer that tried to overwrite the image of God in man with something else, something twisted, ancient, and unholy. And this helps explain the fierce, violent commandments to destroy entire tribes in Canaan, to leave no one alive, not even the children. To modern ears, it sounds brutal, cruel. But what if those tribes were not fully human? What if they were carriers of a bloodline never meant to exist? Forgotten in our time today, few speak of the Nephilim. Seminaries skip past Genesis 6. Sunday schools sanitize the story of David and Goliath, turning it into a metaphor for courage. But in doing so, we forget what David was really fighting. Not just a giant, but the remnant of a rebellion that began in heaven. The church no longer teaches this war, but evil does not wait for permission to return. Could they still be among us? And now we must ask, if they returned once, could they return again? If their spirits became the demons of today, as the Book of Enoch suggests, then are they still working, still corrupting, still preparing the earth for another incursion? Could the strange experiments in human genetics, transhumanism, and DNA manipulation be opening doors once closed by God himself? Could we be seeing the rise, not of myth, but of memory? And if the days of Noah are returning, just as Jesus warned in Matthew 24, then perhaps so are the Nephilim, because this was never just a story about giants. It was about blood, about rebellion, about the crossing of divine boundaries, and about the long war that never ended. In the final part, we will explore the terrifying possibility that the Nephilim are preparing to rise again in the last days, that the ancient enemy has not been defeated, but merely awaits its time, and that time may be now. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. These were the words of Jesus in Matthew 24:37. A warning not just of general wickedness, but of a specific era, a time defined by corruption so deep, heaven itself had to intervene, an age when the boundaries between human and divine, natural and unnatural, were shattered, an age of fallen angels, forbidden unions, and the Nephilim. So what if those days are returning? What if the Nephilim were never just a tale of the past, but a shadow of the future? The last days and the days of Noah. When Jesus linked his return to the days of Noah, he was speaking to an audience that knew exactly what that meant. They understood the gravity of Genesis 6. They knew of the Watchers, the giants, the flood, not just as stories, but as cosmic precedents. In Noah's time, evil was not just moral, it was biological. It invaded the very DNA of humanity. God did not just flood a sinful world. He cleansed a contaminated gene pool, one that threatened to erase the image of God from his creation. If Jesus meant that the end times would echo that era, then we must ask, are we once again tampering with the human design? Modern science, echoes of ancient sin. Today, the boundaries of human biology are under siege. CRISPR gene editing, chimeric embryos, human-animal hybrids in lab tests, synthetic DNA, projects to resurrect ancient species, DNA manipulation on a scale unimaginable even 50 years ago, and most disturbingly, the quiet talk of post-humanism, a world where man becomes more than man, a hybrid being, enhanced, modified. What is this, if not the very sin of the Watchers? What is this, if not a return to the days when the sons of God saw the daughters of men? Enoch warned of forbidden knowledge, weapons, cosmetics, seduction, sorcery, the teaching of the stars given by angels to men. Today we call it science. But is it knowledge we were ever meant to have? Are the Nephilim spirits still active? If the Nephilim died in the flood, but their spirits became the disembodied demons, as Enoch and later Jewish tradition claim, then they are still with us, not in physical form, but in influence. Jesus constantly confronted demons. Many of them craved physical bodies. They sought embodiment, access, permission. Were they simply fallen angels? Or were they the spirits of those unholy giants? And if the Nephilim spirits crave bodies, could they one day return in flesh? Through technology, possession, hybridization? The pieces are falling into place. The alien deception, Nephilim in disguise. A growing number of researchers, theologians, and whistleblowers have begun to connect the dots between modern UFO phenomena and ancient Nephilim lore. These aliens, they argue, are not from other planets, but spiritual beings masquerading as extraterrestrials. They abduct. They perform genetic experiments. They implant. They manipulate perception. Does that sound familiar? Ancient stories of gods descending to mate with humans. Modern stories of aliens experimenting with reproductive systems. Could it be that the Nephilim are returning but under a new disguise? A new mythology? What better deception for a secular world than to repackage ancient demons as cosmic neighbors? A hidden agenda throughout history, secret societies, occult traditions, mystery religions, Gnostic texts, all of them hint, directly or indirectly, at a hidden knowledge passed down from the gods, a pure bloodline, a serpent seed, a coming golden age when the gods return. It is a theme that runs through the corridors of power, ancient Babylon, Egypt, Greece, Rome. Even today, symbols of fallen knowledge, like the all-seeing eye, the pine cone, symbol of the pineal gland, and the serpent, are etched into architecture, currency, and rituals. The elite have always longed for the secret that the Watchers once gave, because with it comes power, and power is what the Nephilim craved. Why this matters now? If the Nephilim are returning, if the genetic corruption of mankind is accelerating, if the world is once again calling good evil and evil good, then we are not just watching the collapse of civilization, we are witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy. The last great rebellion may not come through tanks and missiles, but through biology, through a new humanity, a post-human race, no longer bearing the image of God, but the image of something else. This is why the Nephilim matter. This is why they were erased. Not because they were myth, but because their story was too close to a future the enemy still wants. A terrifying question. If the Nephilim were real, if they were born of angels and women, if they brought about the flood, if their spirits became the demons Christ cast out, if they re-emerge in Canaan, if David fought them, if their bloodlines have lingered, if their knowledge is being rediscovered, if their image is being remade, then what else is true? What else has been hidden? What else is rising? A final warning. The Bible is not a safe book. It is not a fairy tale. It is a record of cosmic war, a war for the soul and the body of mankind. The Nephilim were a weapon forged in rebellion, a counterfeit creation, a mockery of divine order. They were erased from sermons, but not from prophecy. They were cast into the deep, but not forgotten. They will return. So now we must choose to ignore the signs and cling to a sanitized faith, or to open our eyes, to search the scriptures again, to prepare for the days that are coming, because Jesus did not say, as it was in the days of Noah, unless you're a modern Christian. He said, so shall it be. You were not meant to hear this by accident. You were meant to wake up, because this isn't just a conspiracy. This is the ancient war resurfacing. The Nephilim may rise again, but so will the remnant. So rise, stand firm, and seek the truth before the days of Noah return in full.